love that became a nightmare. He fell in love with a painting, and then it nearly ruined his life. In the shadowy streets of 1950s, Edinburgh, where the fog clung to cobblestone alleys like a ghost's whisper, Thomas Sutherland's life took a chilling turn. He was a bright, hopeful man in his early 20s, unburdened by the horrors of the world, until the day he stepped into a dimly lit, forgotten corner of a local gallery. On that fateful afternoon, his eyes met hers. The painting wasn't prominent. In fact, it hung in the shadows, as though hiding from view, cloaked in an almost malevolent silence. It was a portrait of a woman, her pale skin shimmering faintly, her jet black hair cascading around her shoulders, and those piercing eyes. Yes, the eyes. They reached out to him, drilling into his soul, pulling him closer with an almost predatory intensity. Wherever he stood in the room, her gaze followed, alive, knowing, and endlessly haunting. Thomas couldn't look away. He felt a strange warmth, an unnerving pull that transcended admiration or curiosity. It was as if the painting wanted him to stay. Before he realized what had come over him, he found himself standing at the gallery's counter, buying the painting with trembling hands, unsure if he had been swayed by some deep affliction of the heart or something darker. Once the painting hung on the wall in his small apartment, it became the centerpiece of his world. At first, he told himself it was simply a masterpiece of craftsmanship, a rare work of art. But as days passed, those moments of appreciation twisted into obsession. But then, the dreams began. In the haunting void of night, she came alive. The woman from the painting appeared in vivid clarity within his dreams. Her lips moved, her voice soft and sorrowful. "Thomas," she would whisper, her tone pleading, "help me, I'm trapped. They're coming for me. And for you." The nightmares grew with a relentless ferocity. At first, she beckoned him just as the painting had. She'd look through him with those same piercing eyes, filling him with a strange desire to protect her. But soon, her pleas turned to screams. She'd thrash and wail, warning him of strange figures lurking in the shadows, unseen but always inching closer. And when Thomas awoke, drenched in sweat, he would find himself staring directly into the painting. Her expression seemed different, more desperate, more alive, like she had been watching him while he slept. Thomas's world began to unravel. The laughs he once shared with friends turned into tense silences. The tasks of everyday life seemed trivial compared to the enigma of the painting. He couldn't focus at work. He couldn't stand to leave the apartment for long. Every free moment was spent studying the artwork, searching for hidden clues. He swore he saw faint cracks in the image's background, cracks that revealed flickering images of shadowed landscapes or grasping hands. No one understood his paranoia. When he confided in his closest friend Peter about the dreams, Peter merely laughed it off. "You're spending too much time alone, mate," he said dismissively. But Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching him. The breaking point came on a night when the storm outside raged with a ferocity that shook the very bones of the city. Lightning flashed, illuminating his apartment, and a deafening crack of thunder jolted him awake. He bolted upright, instinctively looking toward the painting, and froze. Her eyes, they weren't just following him anymore. They stared directly at him, wide and glassy with pure terror. Her mouth, which had been painted closed, was slightly parted as if she had been about to scream. The shadowed background of the painting seemed darker, more sinister, as though it had grown alive with malice. He thought he saw faint traces of claw marks streaked across the canvas. And then the whispers came back, louder this time. Words he couldn't quite make out, layered atop one another, a chorus of anguish. He stumbled backward as the voices grew stronger. The air in the room grew thick, suffocating and cold. "Help me!" The voice, hers, rose above the cacophony. Thomas turned and ran from the apartment that night. But where could he go? The eyes haunted him even as he sat in the dim light of a small cafe down the street, trembling with an inexplicable terror. Despite his fear, Thomas returned home. He had no choice. But as the days wore on, the painting's curse grew stronger. Objects in his apartment began to shift inexplicably. Chairs would move, windows would slam shut. He would find strange scratches on the walls around the painting, scratches that oozed a faint blackish residue, as though the canvas itself was bleeding its darkness into the world. During one particularly long, sleepless night, he noticed something horrifying. A faint outline of hands began pressing against the inside of the canvas, their clawed fingers dragging across the painted surface. They writhed as though clawing to escape, and yet they remained bound inside, as if restrained by an invisible force. Desperate, Thomas began digging into the painting's origins. He learned that it wasn't just art, it was infamously known as the Wailing Portrait, a piece whose sordid history was riddled with tragedy. Each owner had either died or disappeared, leaving behind tales of madness and despair. Thomas became frantic. He spent hours trying to burn the canvas, cut it, rip it apart, but every attempt failed. The material would heal itself, the paint bubbling with a sinister glow whenever he tried to damage it. The woman's pleas in his dreams turned frantic. "You must listen, Thomas, they are coming for you." But her warnings only deepened his growing paranoia. Every shadow seemed to bend toward him. Every passerby seemed to wear a face he swore he'd seen in his nightmares. Even daylight offered no sanctuary. The unease hung heavy over him. Finally, one night, exhausted and teetering on the brink of sanity, Thomas reached his breaking point. He awoke to see the painted woman clutching at the edges of the frame, her twisted hands gripping the canvas as though she were on the verge of breaking free. Her expression was agonized, her eyes pleading, and yet her mouth now twisted into a half-smile of sinister intent. The room grew impossibly dark. Shadows pooled from the corners, stretching toward the painting. And then he saw them, the figures she had warned him about. They emerged from the darkness, eyeless, hollow beings whose presence seemed to drain the life from the air. Thomas screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the void. He lunged to cover the painting, but his hands passed through air. It was as though the canvas had ceased to exist in the material world. One by one, the shadows closed in on him, the whispers growing to deafening howls. The last thing Thomas saw before darkness consumed him was her face, silent, still, and frozen in the same lifeless expression as when he had first encountered her. To this day, the Wailing Portrait hangs in a locked room of an obscure museum. The curators will speak only in hushed tones about its supposed history, claiming it has been thoroughly debunked as merely a piece of unsettling folklore. And yet, visitors report feeling its piercing gaze press upon them, even from outside the museum doors. Little remains of Thomas Sutherland's life. No friends, no family, no definitive records. He simply vanished, swallowed by whatever dark world the painting may have opened. Some say his spirit lingers in the gallery where it all began, warning others not to fall prey to the pull of the cursed artwork. If you think this story is as haunting as I do, hit that like button, share it with your bravest friends, and don't forget to subscribe. But be careful. If you feel someone watching you as you do, it might be more than just your imagination. After all, who's to say you won't become the next chapter in the story of the Wailing Portrait?